Hey, mop lady, try not to cry on the tiles. The hallway erupted in laughter. Evelyn Cross didn't flinch. She didn't glare. She simply tightened her grip on the mop and kept moving. Like none of it mattered. She never raised her voice, never fought back, until the inspection. Roll up your sleeve, the officer ordered. And when she did, the room went dead silent. A viper coiled around her arm, the mark of a unit that doesn't exist on paper. A Black Ops ghost, inked into skin and memory. That wasn't just a tattoo, it was a warning. And now everyone's asking, who is Evelyn Cross? And why does her silence echo louder than any command? Fort Elias didn't welcome outsiders. It broke them. The concrete buildings bore no signs, only barbed wire and rusted metal gates that squeaked even when the wind was still. It was where promising soldiers came to be shaped into elite operators, or discarded for being too soft, too slow, or too silent. And into this unforgiving environment walked Evelyn Cross. No ceremony, no rank, no introduction, just a gray maintenance shirt, loose cargo pants, and a cart full of bleach, gloves, and old brushes. Most of the recruits didn't even notice her at first. Those who did assumed she was a civilian temp hired by base maintenance. Another shadow to walk around, another nobody mopping up behind real soldiers. Until they needed someone to laugh at. Hey, Mama Mop, you missed a spot on your face, one recruit barked as she knelt to scrub a scuffed patch of tile in the main hallway. The others cracked up, tossing half-eaten protein bars into her bucket as if it were a trash can. She didn't look up. She simply wrung out the rag and kept wiping in slow, practiced circles. Another day, another recruit stepped in front of her path and deliberately spilled his canteen. Oops, he smirked, holding his arms out like it was a crime scene. Better clean that, ghost girl. Yeah, another piped in, before the old maid gets cranky. And so the nicknames were born. Mama Mop, the ghost, old maid. They used them like tools, mocking tones thrown casually across the mess hall, training field, and dormitory wings. Evelyn never acknowledged a single one. She kept her head down and her pace steady, Mop trailing behind her like a tail she didn't ask for. She didn't flinch when someone kicked her bucket, didn't pause when someone slapped a wet towel on the floor and demanded, "Get to it, janitor." At one point, a junior logistics officer, not much older than the recruits themselves, waltzed by with a clipboard and snapped, "You're in the way again. Move it, old maid." She moved, not quickly, not submissively, just deliberately, like she was pacing out something the others couldn't see. Every insult seemed to fall into a void with her. No response, no glare, just silence. And maybe that's what annoyed them most. The lack of reaction, the unwillingness to play the part of the humiliated, like they weren't even real enough to offend her. Some started to whisper she might be mute. Others said she was probably just slow. Medical case, one whispered in the barracks after lights out. Probably someone's cousin the army's trying to hide. But Evelyn wasn't hiding. She was enduring. In the training yard, she pushed a trash bin through gravel and scattered bottle caps. A group of recruits lobbed more bottles in front of her path, laughing as she slowly bent and picked them up one by one. She probably used to be hot like 30 years ago, one of them joked. Now she's just stuck in ghost mode. At night, she wiped down the gym floor while soldiers grunted through late reps. One of them, broad-shouldered, always flexing in mirrors, dropped a weight close to her mop, trying to get a rise. "Careful, Grandma," he grinned. "You break a hip and nobody's going to notice for days." Her only answer was a clean pass of the mop over the spot he scuffed. She didn't even look at him. Even some of the officers joined in. Lieutenant Voss, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, leaned toward another officer one afternoon as Evelyn passed the conference room. "She looks like she got lost on the way to a halfway house." The other chuckled, but as Evelyn turned her head, just slightly, Voss fell silent. Her smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something else. Discomfort, maybe, or recognition. Whatever it was, it passed unspoken. For weeks, the routine repeated. Evelyn moved like a ghost, present, consistent, invisible to all except those who needed someone to demean. And still, she never flinched. Never raised her voice. Never even sighed. She simply cleaned. But there was something in her movements. Something in the way she wrapped up her gloves after each shift. The way she folded the corners of her mop head back into the bucket just right. The way she stood still, not defeated, but grounded, like someone who'd been through storms far worse than ridicule. She didn't belong at Fort Elias, not because she was beneath them, but because she was beyond them. And though no one saw it yet, though they mocked and dismissed and degraded her, there was something in Evelyn Cross's silence that made the air a little heavier whenever she passed by. They thought she was just a janitor, but Fort Elias had no idea who they had handed the mop to. It began with a marker. A room full of junior officers stood before a whiteboard in the strategy room, arms crossed, boots tapping on the tile. A lieutenant named Hayes was walking through a training simulation plan, routes, fallback points, suppression arcs, his voice confident, a little too loud, like he was performing more than briefing. Evelyn Cross was there in the back, quiet as always. Mop leaning against the wall, gloved hands folded behind her back, waiting for them to finish so she could clean the floor they'd just dirtied with coffee and scuffed boots. No one looked at her, not even once. But when Hayes drew a blue line across the lower perimeter, "This is where our squad flanks and suppresses the north team." She shifted slightly. Then she walked forward. The room fell into confused silence. "Ma'am, excuse me?" Hayes said, half joking. "I think this room's closed for cleaning." Evelyn didn't answer. She took the marker from the tray without permission, stepped up to the board and calmly drew a correction, just 3 inches of repositioning. Then she set the marker down and walked back to her mop. No words, just geometry. The colonel in the corner blinked, then walked forward and studied the new line. He muttered something under his breath. "Well, I'll be damned," and turned to Hayes. "She's right. That's the correct suppression line. That's doctrine from Night Ridge." Hayes flushed. How would she even know that? But no one asked Evelyn. She just finished her mopping and left the room, her boots silent on the tile. The whispers began that night. By the time the next week rolled in, people started watching her more closely, especially Sergeant Nolan Reyes. Reyes wasn't loud like the others. He didn't throw insults or laugh at cheap jokes. He was observant, methodical, and quiet in a way that made him dangerous. The kind of soldier who didn't miss the way people stood, the way they glanced, the way they held tension in their shoulders. And Evelyn Cross didn't move like a janitor. He first noticed it in the gym. She was mopping the floor after the evening rush, sweat still lingering in the air, weights racked sloppily. One of the bigger recruits, Malone, was showing off again. Dropped a 65-pound dumbbell just to make noise, then sneered, "Hey, janitor, why don't you lift something real for once?" His friends laughed, watching her for a reaction. Evelyn didn't say anything. She set the mop against the wall, walked to the dumbbell, crouched and lifted it, with one hand slow and steady. Then she placed it gently on the rack. "Too light," she said flatly, then walked back to the mop. The gym went silent. Reyes was watching from the second floor, behind the tinted glass of the observation deck. He didn't smile, didn't blink. Just leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping the railing. A few days later, the pistol range provided the second crack in the story. It was late afternoon, dry wind blowing through the trees beyond the berm. A handful of recruits were still out, firing half-heartedly at silhouettes while laughing about dinner plans. Carter, the loudmouth with a permanent smirk, spotted Evelyn sweeping shell casings near the benches. He held up his Glock and waved. "Hey, janitor, ever even touched one of these?" Evelyn paused, looked at the broom in her hand, then back at him. Carter tossed the unloaded weapon at her feet like it was a joke. "Come on, let's see what Grandma's got." She picked it up, checked the chamber, racked it, and calmly loaded a single round from the table. Reyes had just stepped onto the range and froze mid-step. Evelyn raised the pistol, took no more than half a second to line up, and fired. Dead center. One clean hole. No wasted movement, no flare, no breathy tension like the younger recruits. She set the pistol down and said, "Thanks." Then she went back to sweeping brass as if nothing had happened. That night, Sergeant Reyes stayed late. He opened a secure archive he hadn't touched in years, cross-referencing old files from classified units long since erased. Not by oversight, by intent. There were whispers of Viper Echo, an urban warfare unit used for off-grid operations in regions the military refused to admit they had touched. All records destroyed after a mission called Silent Quarry. No survivors on record, no footage, no statements. But one low-res photo survived in an encrypted report. It showed a soldier's arm blurred by motion, turning toward a chopper. A partial tattoo, a serpent's body mid-coil, the same shape now inked on Evelyn Cross's arm. Reyes leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his chest. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In the days that followed, Evelyn's routine didn't change, but how others saw her did. During a mess hall cleaning shift, she overheard two junior officers bickering over crossfire radius measurements for a virtual simulation. She didn't interject, just adjusted the whiteboard when they stepped out. When they returned, the simulation had corrected itself. They didn't mention it, but they also didn't erase it. At the motor pool, she helped a mechanic realign the rear axle configuration on a Humvee, without asking, without boasting. Just a brief suggestion. That bolt's reversed. It worked. Word traveled fast, as it always does on a base like Fort Elias. But still, Evelyn said nothing. She clocked in, cleaned, left. But Reyes kept watching. He began noting where she stood during meetings, how she timed her movements, how she never turned her back to certain rooms, never crossed exposed intersections without scanning both directions. That wasn't janitor behavior. That was survival training. Reyes didn't report her. He didn't need to, because part of him had begun to suspect something deeper. That Evelyn Cross hadn't just been assigned here by accident. She wasn't forgotten. She was waiting, and Fort Elias was waking up to a presence it wasn't prepared for. It was supposed to be routine. The officers gathered in the command conference room like they always did, some fresh from the field, others still carrying steam from earlier debates. The air was thick with ego and stale coffee. Diagrams covered the whiteboards, movement charts, simulated enemy positions, supply lines that curved and crisscrossed across plastic overlays. Captain Benson, the training coordinator, pointed at a sector map with a red marker and said, "Now, if we take the high ground along Echo Ridge." A voice interrupted him, low, calm, razor sharp. "That ridge collapses under sustained fire." Heads turned. The room fell still. At the back of the room, where she had been wiping fingerprints from the glass paneling, Evelyn Cross stood upright, rag still in one hand, eyes locked on the board. No hesitation, no emotion, just observation stated as fact. Captain Benson chuckled uncomfortably. "Excuse me?" Evelyn walked forward 2 steps and pointed with the edge of her cloth. "The shale fractures after impact. You'll be exposed by minute 6. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, walked back to the windows, and resumed cleaning. Silence echoed for several seconds after. Later that night, Lieutenant Ramirez leaned against the mess hall counter, stirring sugar into a bitter cup of decaf. Across from him, Captain Hensley whispered, "Did you hear what the janitor said during the op brief?" Ramirez nodded once, then whispered, "She knew the topography, knew it like she's been there." "And her tone," Hensley added. "It wasn't a guess." "It was a report," Ramirez said quietly. A pause. Then Hensley leaned in, lowered his voice further. "You ever heard of Viper Echo?" Ramirez blinked. "That old rumor?" he muttered. "That unit that supposedly got wiped out during the quarry mission? No records, no citations, no graves." "Exactly." They didn't say Evelyn's name. They didn't have to. By the end of the week, whispers had bled across every hallway of Fort Elias. Recruits swapped theories during night watch. Mechanics paused their wrench work mid-tighten to trade stories. Some joked that she was special forces sent to spy on them. Others said she was just mentally unstable and had memorized too many training manuals. But not everyone laughed. A few older sergeants grew quiet when her name came up. One corporal admitted he saw her examining a tactical map in the storage room, but when he asked if she needed help, she just walked away without a word. The term Viper Echo returned like a ghost long buried. An unconfirmed special operations team from years ago, rumored to be made up of soldiers so specialized they were never listed in personnel rosters. No patches, no insignia, no funerals. just a code name. Viper. And now that word was being whispered again, paired with a tattoo, a stare, and a silence too practiced to be civilian. Inside the officers' lounge, a few lieutenants gathered near the fireplace, their voices low. "She's ex-military," one said confidently. "You can see it in the way she moves." "She's more than that," said another. "Did you see how Captain Whitaker shut up after she corrected the terrain projection? He didn't even argue." Someone exhaled and added quietly, "It's like she's been playing dead, waiting." In the mess hall, no one threw trash at her anymore. In the gym, no one dropped weights near her path. Even the nickname Mama Mop disappeared like smoke in the wind. The silence that once made her invisible was now heavy, charged. Every movement she made was observed, analyzed. The way she folded her gloves, the precision in her posture, the way she never crossed a threshold without glancing at both corners. Not paranoia, training. Sergeant Nolan Reyes, who had already been watching her for weeks, took it a step further. He approached her one morning just after sunrise while she was cleaning the glass display case near the base's honor wall. "Where'd you learn ridge collapse patterns?" he asked gently. Evelyn paused her wiping, looked at him, not coldly, but unreadable. "Old briefing," she replied, then turned back to the glass. He didn't push, but he noticed how her eyes never left his reflection as he walked away. By now, the silence around her had become its own kind of command. Not one given, but one received. One afternoon, she passed two recruits arguing over a firing solution diagram. One of them turned to ask her something, then stopped mid-sentence. She didn't say a word, just gave a slight shake of the head and kept walking. The recruit nodded like he'd been corrected. The other just stared after her. That night, a group of new arrivals were being shown around the base. One of them, a loudmouthed corporal from Texas, saw Evelyn mopping near the barracks hallway and scoffed, "What kind of place lets civilians clean their war rooms?" An older recruit pulled him aside. "Don't," he warned. The Texan laughed. "Why not? You guys scared of the cleaning lady?" The older one just stared at him. "You ever hear of a unit that doesn't exist?" The Texan frowned. "What?" "They say she's one of them." "One of who?" "Viper Echo." He laughed. "That's just a myth." The older recruit didn't smile. "Tell that to the lieutenant who hasn't spoken since she corrected his diagram." Evelyn Cross still hadn't raised her voice, still hadn't made a single demand. But the foundation of Fort Elias, the false bravado, the hierarchy of noise, had started to crumble beneath her silence, and no one was ready to admit the truth forming in their heads. They weren't just in the presence of a former soldier, they were standing in the long shadow of a ghost. And somewhere, deep down, in the hearts of even the proudest voices on base, one question began to grow louder than orders. If this is how she moves when cleaning floors, what did she move like when the mission was real? It began with the obstacle course. It was just before dawn when the recruits gathered at the yard. Fog still clung to the dirt, and the first rays of sunlight were barely cutting through the gray. Sergeant Dawson blew the whistle and barked for them to form ranks. His voice echoed through the trees, met with groggy shuffling and reluctant boots in the mud. The course was legendary. Rope climbs, wall scaling, water pits, timed crawls. Even the top recruits rarely made it through without a stumble. But that morning, something shifted. Evelyn was just cleaning the observation deck above, mopping footprints from yesterday's training. From below, one of the newer cadets pointed up at her and laughed. "Maybe janitor lady wants to give it a shot. I bet she can't even lift herself over the first wall." His friends chuckled. Dawson didn't respond. Evelyn didn't look down. She simply paused. Then, without a word, she walked to the far end of the deck, slid off her gloves, and climbed over the rail. Gasps scattered through the yard. She dropped silently into the dirt below. "Ma'am," Dawson started, half warning, half stunned. But she was already moving. No stretching, no commands, no warm-up. She ran. And what followed didn't resemble training. It resembled muscle memory. She moved through the course like a shadow, fluid, controlled, each movement deliberate and precise. Up the rope without pause, over the wall in one breath, through the mud crawl without hesitation. The recruits froze mid-joke. One dropped his protein bar, another forgot to breathe. She cleared the final sprint and hit the marker, then turned around and walked back towards the observation deck, picking up her gloves along the way. No sweat, no smile. Just efficiency. The stopwatch in Dawson's hand blinked red, faster than anyone had managed that month. He said nothing. Later that afternoon, she passed through the motor pool. The mechanics were loud as usual, swearing over a particularly stubborn oil stain beneath one of the decommissioned Jeeps. Several attempts with chemical scrub had failed. The concrete had darkened permanently, or so they thought. "Forget it," one of them sighed. "That stain's been here longer than I have." Another leaned back against the workbench. "Let the janitor give it a go. Maybe her mop's magic." They laughed, not expecting anything. Evelyn knelt beside the stain, looked at it, pressed her gloved palm to it for a moment, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then she went to work. No heavy chemicals, no brute force, just focus, using a technique none of them recognized. A rag, a subtle pressure, a certain rhythm. 10 minutes later, the stain was gone. The floor looked like new. The mechanic stared. She stood, nodded once, and walked away. "How'd she do that?" one finally asked. The room remained silent. Even the chapel wasn't immune. It was a quiet evening, just past dinner. The chapel was dim, its pews empty, its stained glass windows casting dull colors on the floor. Evelyn moved between the aisles with her cart, wiping down the backs of the wooden benches. A small group of recruits slipped in, loud, cocky, looking for somewhere private to goof off. One of them, a tall kid named Parker, noticed her immediately. "Oh, great. Even the janitor's here now," he groaned. "You gonna bless the mop too?" His friends laughed, but softer this time. The room carried her silence differently. She didn't turn, just kept polishing the wood. "You know you don't belong here, right?" Parker pressed, now testing her. "This is a place for people with purpose, not whatever you are." She finally stopped, stood still, then turned slowly, facing him. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice, when it came, was so calm it cut through the space like cold air through warm fog. "Then why are you here?" The recruits shifted. Parker blinked. "What?" "You mock the quiet, but you stepped into silence on your own," she said. "Think about that." Parker's mouth opened, then closed. No one said another word. Evelyn returned to her work. The chapel stayed quiet for the rest of the evening. It wasn't just the recruits who were rattled anymore. The officers were whispering now, behind closed doors, between meetings. "She shouldn't be here," one said. "She's interfering with discipline." Another replied, "She hasn't disobeyed a single order." "No," came the reply, "but everyone's watching her instead of us." They had tried to dismiss her, tried to belittle her, even tried to ignore her. None of it worked, because she never broke the rules. She simply revealed them. By now, the presence of Evelyn Cross had become impossible to compartmentalize. She didn't ask for respect. She didn't take power. She dismantled ego just by existing. During a routine supply run, 2 lieutenants passed her near the logistics office. One muttered under his breath, "I bet even command doesn't know she's here." The other looked around nervously. "What if they do?" They didn't finish the thought. Even Reyes, who had seen this coming, started to feel the shift in the air. Fort Elias was a base built on bravado, on shouting, ranks, pressure, and posture. But Evelyn Cross didn't posture. She didn't shout, and yet her presence was louder than their highest-ranking commander. She never corrected anyone twice. Once was enough. She never entered a room with authority. Yet every room adjusted around her. By the end of that week, soldiers who had once laughed now moved aside when she passed. Not out of fear, but out of something else. Respect laced with discomfort. She had not asked to be watched. But now no one could stop. And still, Evelyn Cross had said nothing about who she was. Not a rank, not a title, not a story. But her actions whispered what records could not. She wasn't a symbol. She was a reminder. Of what? That the strongest people in the room are rarely the loudest, and that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It mops the floor, waits, and watches. The first sign wasn't the sound, it was the silence that followed. Fort Elias was never quiet. Even before sunrise, the base buzzed with clattering boots, barked instructions, and metal doors slamming shut. But that morning, just after roll call, the noise began to drop. One by one, soldiers turned their eyes skyward. Something was coming. Low on the horizon, slicing through the pale blue dawn, a black helicopter approached. Not camo green, not marked with training insignias, matte black. Silent rotors, no identifiers. It hovered for a moment above the landing pad like it was judging the place, then descended, slow, steady, surgical. The rotor wash kicked up dust, loose papers, and silence. People gathered. Recruits stepped out from the mess hall. Mechanics leaned from under Humvees. Officers halted their briefings mid-sentence. No one knew what to expect. The door opened. Colonel Sandhurst stepped out, his boots touching down like punctuation. He wore a crisp, dark uniform that didn't match any standard issue. Pressed, deliberate, with the presence of someone who didn't ask permission. In his hand, he held a classified folder sealed with red bands and a NATO emblem. He didn't stop to greet the base commander. He didn't look at anyone, except the soldiers now frozen around the yard. He walked directly to the center of the compound, turned slowly, opened the folder, then spoke. Evelyn Cross, reactivation authorized. A collective stillness fell over the base. Some blinked. Others looked at one another, unsure they'd heard correctly. Near the edge of the yard, behind a row of crates, a woman slowly stepped out of shadow. Gray shirt, cargo pants, black boots. Her sleeve was rolled just enough to reveal the viper tattoo, coiled tightly around her upper arm, its head resting beneath the curve of her shoulder. The recruits who had mocked her, those who'd called her Mama Mop, who tossed bottles and spit words in her direction, stood rigid, their faces drained of color. The tattoo wasn't just ink, it was a mark of warning, of history they weren't cleared to read. Evelyn said nothing. She didn't salute, didn't hesitate. She walked toward the chopper with the same calm pace she'd used pushing a mop through the barracks. But everything had changed. Every step she took was a reminder that she had been watching all along, that her silence had never been submission, it was restraint. Officers moved aside instinctively. Colonel Sandhurst waited for her without expression, the file closed under his arm. She stopped at the chopper's edge. He nodded once. No words. She boarded. The door closed behind her. The rotors picked up speed, and then she was gone. Back on the ground, Fort Elias didn't move for several minutes. Not a shout, not a joke, not a whisper. Somewhere in the dust still hanging in the air, a few soldiers tried to piece it together. She was just... No, she never was. One by one, they returned to their stations. But they didn't walk the same. And from that day forward, the mop closet in the north wing remained untouched. As if they knew she might come back. There's something deeply American about a story like Evelyn Cross's. We live in a world that values titles, uniforms, and loud voices. But sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one sweeping the floor, not the one giving the orders. Evelyn reminds us that quiet strength still matters. That dignity isn't earned by shouting, but by enduring. And that those who have truly served, in war, in life, in silence, don't need to prove anything. The proof is in how they carry themselves when no one's watching. How many people have we overlooked in our own lives? The janitor, the elderly neighbor, the woman at the register who moves with purpose and calm. What stories do they carry? What have they survived that we can't even imagine? And more importantly, what does it say about us when we only listen after the helicopter lands? Let us know what this story made you feel. Have you ever met someone like Evelyn? Someone underestimated, forgotten, until the moment they stood still and the room changed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read them all. And if this story moved you or reminded you of someone you respect, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video, especially with those who still believe quiet people have nothing to say, because sometimes they're the ones who saved everything. Thank you for watching.